to have Adrian Plank, candidate for the 47th House District, speak with us today at Muleskinners. We have a number of us have followed Adrian in his previous campaigns, and since he successfully won the primary in August, we're really excited to see him get elected in November. Thank you, Adrian.
How's everybody doing? Thumbs up. Well, it's good to be here again. It's always a good time to speak to you all. You know, I put in a lot of time, put away my family for a while. You know, you got to work, you got to campaign, you got to knock doors. There's a lot of stuff to do when you're running a campaign, and it can be pretty intense at times. So I appreciate your all support, and it does help out, lift up not just me as a candidate, but all of us candidates. And so we appreciate your uplifting words and support, especially with things that we got to do, postcards and knocking doors and stuff and letters, and it's appreciated. And I think that was the first thing I needed to say. I appreciate it. So, okay, so most of you know who I am, right? I don't know that anybody doesn't. Yeah. Well, I'll give you a brief where I'm from and to do. You know, I'm originally from Huntsville. I spent most of my time there. My parents are from Brookfield, Marceline area. So my nature is obviously rural. I like the rural atmosphere. When I moved out of the house and went to college, I ended up in Columbia after that. And I've been here ever since. And so since '96, I've been in Columbia. So I've been in Central Missouri my entire life. I know the terrain and landscape from like the back of my hand. So I feel like because of that, I would be an excellent representative at the state house, at least for the 47th district, right? And so there's a lot of things that I see that in rural and from the people that I've talked to, things that need to change, especially when it comes to farming. And I've talked about that before. We've gone to an industrialized factory style of farming instead of developing and encouraging people to grow their own food and actually be farmers themselves. So with that being said, with corporate farm tactics, and if you don't think it's here, you got Swift Foods out of town here building a building, and that's a lot of that comes, and their funding comes from places like JBS, which is Brazilian owned. And we can't allow for the destruction of our farmers in a monopolized food industry controlled by foreign interests. And so is that a hard stance to take? Absolutely. They got money. So with that money comes a tax and pressure, and it's hard for a legislator to stay on task because of that. And but there's things that we can do. You know, we can stop allowing Republicans to push bills that allow them to buy up Missouri farmland. We can also introduce different farming practices that is more sustainable than that factory system. And we can also introduce old but new crops. And that's where hemp comes in. Hemp is what I consider a sustainable farming plant. It's a weed actually, but we make a lot of paper products, and with paper products comes the destruction of trees, and we can get 2 to 3 different crops in one season from hemp. So it's sustainable. It doesn't take chemicals because it's so dense and can be grown so dense, which we all know what chemicals do for us when we're talking about corn and soybeans and that sort of thing. There's lots of studies out there that show that these chemicals cause cancer. And it also destroys our soil and and whenever we destroy soil, then what are we going to grow then? So we need to be more conscious of what we do. Go to no-till farming. No-till farming means that you don't till up the ground, which exposes our soil. When you expose your soil, it releases carbon and dries out the soil. And so if we can leave those plants or grass or previous crops on the ground and they make machinery that can plant seed without tilling it up. So we need to move to that. And I think just that in itself will help us with our cancer issues and our health issues. So hemp, for example, cotton takes 5,000 gallons of water to produce 2.2 pounds of cotton. We don't do a whole lot with cotton in Missouri, but there's a lot of states that do. Compared to 700 gallons to produce 2.2 pounds of hemp, and you get more crops out of it. But when you keep that foliage on the ground, it also holds 6% more of the moisture in the ground. And so when you can keep that moisture, especially when we're starving for water and it's getting hotter due to climate issues, there's nobody really pushing for practices that reduce carbon output, especially in the state of Missouri. That just means my task will be even harder to do, right? Which is another good reason why we need to win some races and push for climate policy that helps our state. Not just because of carbon, but economically too. So we used to have some of the strongest strands of hemp in the United States, and we grew a lot of it. We can do that again. It grows just about anywhere. It'll grow in any state. So as far as rotational crops, I think it's a perfect crop. And that goes same with rotational livestock. We need to rotate our livestock into the crops that we've already harvested, which helps with fertilization. That fertilization is the best process when you can do that, not put man-made fertilizers on our ground. We've put so much fertilizer on our ground now. Every year we got to put more and more and more. But if you let nature do its process, we won't have to do that. And I think that becomes vital the hotter it gets. Now, the other climate issues, policies that everybody knows who Caitlin. Go ahead. You got a hand? Can't hear you. Turn your speaker off. On. Pam, you're talking, but we can't hear you.
I have a fanny pack that's made out of hemp, and
Yeah.
I've had it so long, I don't remember when I got it, but the brand is Hempy's Quality Hemp Goods. And it appears to me it's not a fabric I think you'd want to wear next to your skin, but I bet it would make good backpacks and things like that.
Well, and it's so much more durable, which means it's going to last longer.
Right.
And we produce so much clothing now that we waste. I mean, I got a whole closet full of stuff I don't even wear anymore, right? And everybody's got that issue. So, it's just interesting that we have the ability to make the changes. We have the products to do it and the crops that we can do. Our priorities are screwed up. And it has been for years. We subsidize bad farming practices now, and I think we just need to subsidize good farming practices. And that's going to be hard to do because the people with all the money, the factory farm system, have control of our government. So it's just going to be hard to do. But if we don't fight for it, it'll never happen. So hemp does a lot of things. There's lots of protein. It's easier to extract for our health issues and staying healthy. Obviously, the clothing issue, we can replace a lot of plastic products. And we know that we have microparticles in our rain. It's also getting these plastics into our soil. That needs to stop. We've got oceans full of plastic that need to be addressed. We don't do. So we just need a different way to do things and how to produce products that people can use. Hemp's biodegradable, so we don't have to worry about plastics necessarily in our oceans. It's going to biodegrade, which is better for your soil. So there's a lot of benefits to hemp, and Missouri should be leading on that. And we need to incentivize our farmers and give them a new market that hasn't been dominated by corporate farming systems. So, any questions on hemp? Good to go. All right. Now, do you want me to go over any of the ballot initiatives? Is that Amendment 5, maybe?
Yes,
I do have a question on hemp.
Yeah.
This is Kathy Jensen. I may have missed it because my network dropped, but how have farmers that you've contacted been responding to your thoughts on hemp?
You cut out, but I'm guessing you want to know what the farmers feel about hemp?
Yes.
Yes. You know, most farmers don't know a lot about hemp. You know, we have hemp growing in ditches and stuff all over the place, and the hemp is not the same as weed or getting high. You don't get high off of hemp, but it's I don't know if it's the male or female part of the plant, but it's one or the other. Anyway, the farmers really don't know, so we need to have an educational program on how. And you know, it's not hard to grow; it grows anywhere. But as far as harvesting and production and creating products out of it, you know, we have a couple plastic plants here that produce products with plastic. We need to incentivize them to transform their factories into production of hemp products. So, you know, obviously there's a lot of work to be done there, but like I said before, the farmers aren't familiar with it necessarily. There are hemp farmers here. You got to have a permit to grow it. Why? I don't know. They don't have to have a permit to grow corn. But there's lots of little things in there that need to be changed to make it more accessible to grow in Missouri. You know, a lot of people fear it because it looks, it's basically a derivative of the weed plant. They're essentially the same, just one is less THC than the other. 0.03 is hemp or under, whereas the weed plant is whatever you can make it. Anyway, there's
Adrian,
yes.
Is there a market for hemp? If the farmers do grow it, is the price such that it's profitable? It can be profitable?
Yes. And so anything that you make out of wood products, you can make out of hemp, and it's lighter, more durable, less expensive. And so that market means that they can capitalize on it. You can there's hemp concrete. And so all these products that can be made comes from the farmer. So the farmer, and so I don't remember, I had the number in front of me earlier, but it was billions of dollars that could be made by a certain year time. And I don't remember what it is, and I'm not seeing it in my notes here. Okay, well, this says by 2020, it was a $2 billion from hemp growth. So according to Market Watch, the CBD market is projected to grow, just the CBD market is projected to grow 2.1 billion by 2020. We're obviously past that. Of course, you know, that's all the health issues. The CBD, you know, that helps with, you know, I feed CBD to my dog who is 14 years old, and she started having seizures. And so we feed her some CBD tablets, dog treats, and she doesn't have those seizures nearly as often as she used to have, because they used to give her potassium to stop those seizures, but that made her gain a bunch of weight and she was uncomfortable. So we went to the CBD, and it works as good or better. So it's less expensive. So there's so many markets that can be done with the hemp plant. You got a question, Alice?
Yeah, I was thinking Alice has a question, and then either Sue or Herb Tillema has a question. So I guess we'll Alice?
Yeah, so Adrian, all the representatives from Columbia are really aware that we are majorly a university town. So two things you might comment on. One, the bill for, I don't know how many hundreds of millions heading to the governor's desk. How might that impact the university?
So the question is, are you talking about the tax cuts?
Someone was trying to call me. So one, the bill heading, how will that impact Columbia as well as the state? And secondly, this money that students in debt, all these students are waiting for, and Missouri doing a court suit, our unwonderful U.S. Senate
Yeah, I can
try to sue.
I actually have comments on that.
Okay, and specifically, I just wanted to say Mohila and places like that are upset because they might not get all their interest money from students. That's the basis they're suing on. And that definitely is coming from Missouri. Thank you.
Yeah, so your student loan forgiveness, which I think is great. And I say that because I can remember when I was going to school, college was not near that expensive. And I thought it was expensive then, right? And I think it's a tragedy that we, as a nation, don't invest in education. We should be investing in education. We should be putting our students in crippling debt before they even get into the free market. It's ridiculous. If we're a nation that wants to keep up with all other nations in education, we don't put that financial burden on our students. I mean, you can see that, these tax cuts, that's the first thing it's going to do, Alice, is they're going to cut higher education. That's the first thing they always do. And so we can see that we've had a rally with the laborers because they're cutting benefits for them. My neighbor was a manager at the MU power plant, middle management. They cut his job. That's all it's going to do. This is the largest employer in the state of Missouri, well, at least in Columbia. So, but it's major for us. And when they make those cuts, we're going to lose jobs. Those jobs are going to go where? We don't know. I mean, we can't take our major job source and just keep cutting it. And they've always done that. And so whenever they claim that they have an excess budget, that's because of federal dollars, not because of state dollars. So whenever they make these tax cuts, and they are, you can see this special election, they're doing it. It may be okay because we happen to have a budget surplus, but that's because of federal dollars, not because of state dollars. And that's just going to hurt us in the long run. And so another reason to vote for Democrats, right? Those tax cuts overwhelmingly benefit the wealthiest people in Missouri. And so, even when Trump put out his tax cuts for the wealthy, people say, well, that didn't hurt you. Well, it sure did. As a union carpenter, it cut out items that I could write off. And that means my taxes went up to pay for the rich man's tax cuts. And so, Republicans always say, if you're going to defund the police, right? Isn't that the word? They don't want to defund the police because you're looking to make it fail. Well, let's be honest about it. Now we're defunding education, higher education, IRS, any special needs programs for the people who are underprivileged. Those are all going to get cut. They're cutting those to make them fail. I had a conversation with the firefighters union just the other day, and I said, about these same tax cuts. Even if you just keep the budget the same, and a year goes by, budget the same, that's a cut. The budget's the same, but it's a cut because things cost more every year. And after the inflation that we've had, it's only getting worse. People are making less because their dollar's worth less. And so when inflation goes up and your pay don't go up, you're making less. Even if it goes up at the same time, you're not making any gains. It's all the same. So it's, when the wealthy control your system, it's only going to benefit the wealthy. You think the tax system is written by poor people, you're crazy. So, or the working class. The working class don't have time to keep an eye on policy. I can tell you, after pouring concrete this week, working on ladder and putting up steel studs and running a campaign, camps and doors. Our working class don't have a chance. So it's important to me, and I think to a lot of people, that we get more working people elected, but those working people have to have your help.
I know that Tillamoos have been very patient waiting for you to answer some questions, so maybe they could ask a question.
Yeah. Anybody?
Herb or Sue?
Yes, thank you. Adrian, it's
Yeah.
great to see you again.
Yeah, you
Thank
too,
you
bud.
for being here. I think you are a ray of light for parts of this state that we don't address as much here in the city of Columbia.
Right.
Thank you for your endorsement of more modern agricultural practices than are routinely applied in Missouri. How do you deal with this problem, however? I recall vividly that in the late 1970s and 1980s, when I worked hand in hand with agricultural extension, particularly for Ag Econ extension, how resistant Missouri farmers were, especially part-time farmers who outnumber full-time farmers by a mile in Missouri, how resistant they were to suggestions that they shouldn't do something. How do you address that in terms of getting Missouri up to date?
Well, that's
I also went Republican for that reason.
yes. It's something that I've always said is that none of this is going to be easy. And the true source of how do we do it is essentially education. We need to show farmers what it means to keep crops on the ground or foliage on the ground and not till it up, and the reasons why. It's as far as the carbon and the moisture and the other things in the soil that need to stay there. They need to see that only benefits them for the future, because if it benefits them, it'll benefit us. We're not even, you say part-time farmers. Part-time farmers are part-time because they can't make a living farming. And so when I say education, Rockbridge has a greenhouse. I believe Hickman does too. My little school that I went to at Westran was one of the first ones to have a really nice greenhouse. I think we ought to be teaching kids. It should be required to teach them to grow product. If we're really concerned about food insecurities were the lowest when more people farmed. I see you. Susan, go ahead.
Okay. You traditionally had your district before it was redistricted.
Yeah.
was primarily rural.
Yes.
Now you have, I don't know what percentage, but I would gather at least 30 or 40 and maybe 50% of your constituency will be city.
Yes.
What are the issues that you're bringing before the city?
Well, the city will be.
City, what are the subjects that you're trying to interest and get your constituents in the city to back you?
Yes. Okay. So there's a lot of emphasis obviously on farming practices, but that also applies to urban farming. And so you see a lot of, after knocking a lot of doors, I see yards that I see overgrown. And then when I knock the door, it says, well, that's for the bees. That's fantastic. So there's issues there. When it comes to climate and green technology, obviously I'm going to work with the city, especially when it comes to budgets and advocating for certain projects, especially when it comes to solar. Seems like wind has kind of got a little touchy here lately with the green belt and another transmission line wanting to go through Harrisburg. But with that technology, I think a lot of us understand, and after knocking doors, most people are familiar that farming practices absolutely affect what we eat in the city. All right, so And so when we talk about farming in rural, it's also important in the city.
Adrian,
Huh?
Adrian, I recognize that. What I'm trying to get is what issues, other kinds of issues are you bringing up and trying to say that you're backing for your constituencies that are trying to look at what's in it, what you would do for them, not just.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we've kind of already touched on it. The university is a big employer. And with these tax cuts, I can tell you that probably a third of the people in the new parts of the district which is in the city are employees or previous employees of the university. And they understand that these budget cuts are gonna affect our policies and how we activate the university here in town. Not just the University of Missouri, but Stevens College, MACC's here. And so there are several colleges here that depend on our city. With that being said, we also have infrastructure issues. They have sewage problems downtown. And now that Biden has issued with a bipartisan infrastructure bill, $9.1 billion to Missouri, that Republicans are using to push tax cuts now. But that funding in Columbia, Missouri needs to be advocated for by our state legislature, not just me, but Doug Mann. And we are the central hub of the United States when it comes to transportation and delivering products. And so we should have the best roads and bridges, the easiest form to get in and out. Because if we don't, that becomes a problem with supply chain issues. And so since we are dead center of the United States in the state of Missouri, that funding should be advocated for us, not just the 47th district.
But thank you, Adrian. But what about the issues that affect us all as citizens in Missouri that you list on a lot of your literature?
As far as abortion rights?
That's one big issue. Absolutely.
So the very first thing I'm going to do when I'm elected is I've already got, everybody knows Michaela Skelton. She ran in the 50s. Well, she used to make sure that certain bills that were introduced were constitutionally worded properly. So I've met with her. Kip Kendrick introduced a bill when he was a state legislator that would cinch down super PACs. Why do we want to do that? Well, first of all, they spend a lot of money to beat me. Third of all, if the Supreme Court says that a woman's rights should be determined just by the state, then we do not need to have outside undocumented money coming in and influence our policies and our politicians. And so I think legally we have a leg to stand on to sit down these super PACs. We're talking about not just out of state money, but out of the country money. And so I know that they spend about $1 million to beat me, which means that they get the politician that they want. And so when that money affects our policies, our politicians, and the courts are now saying that our policy should be represented just by the state of Missouri, then let us make those decisions. Don't let that outside influence into our state. And I think that's how we make gains with women's rights. If they're going to leave it up to us, I guarantee you there's 70% of the people who did not want Roe versus Wade overturned. And that works in our favor, just like Kansas. Kansas was able to defeat that. But with that being said, we have to safeguard our petition and our amendments, because if we're not allowed to put those on the ballot and they cinch down and charge us for signatures and make it as hard as they can to take advantage of our democratic process, then that's something else we also need to protect. How was that, Alice?
Okay, Adrian, just keep on.
Keep on.
The way you planned.
some other policies I like to see that I'm going to push is publicly funded elections. You know, I've raised a bunch of money. I've spent a lot of money in campaigns, and something that kind of ties to those super PACs. If we can have publicly funded elections, we have the infrastructure to do it with the clerk's office. They allocate funds for polling locations and poll workers and that sort of thing. But if our politicians that want to run and serve as public servants have a certain amount of money that they can work with, then that will force them, in my opinion, to get out and talk to the voters and convince them why they should be represented. And so this outment, see, they're going to spend, I suspect, probably the most in the 47th district that we've ever seen in this election. And it'll be a whole lot of nonsense. And there's nothing I'm going to be able to do about it. If we could cinch those down and force our public servants to speak to our constituents. We've got Republicans who get so focused on the national politics that they forget that they have a district to represent. And so those people need representation. And if you're not talking to those people, what do you represent? National policies? No, we need to be representing the district. The district has many different needs, whether it's rural or city, like you said, and those need to be addressed by your representative. And so that's how I feel about that. So publicly funded elections, can I get it done? Not going to make that promise, but that's something I'd like to push for. Anybody else? Did I miss anything on my list?
Well, I know that the moms demand action are,
Yes.
I think, coming to the office on Sunday and to support you.
And it canvas for me Sunday. So I've also talked with Michaela. We're going to push some gun sense policy legislation that does not suggest anything about taking anybody's gun. We're talking about background checks, safe storage, all those common sense gun laws. I say gun laws, gun safety laws, because if you call them gun laws, they think you're coming for your guns. With those policies, and they're meant to curb our gun deaths. I mean, we're 40,000 people a year die from guns every year in the United States now. Republicans like to talk about Chicago. Yeah, Chicago's got issues, but most of their confiscated guns from criminals are from other states that have no gun laws, like Missouri. And so there shouldn't be open carry. There should be training. And so these are all things we're going to have in this bill. So there's going to be delayed times in getting a gun so they can proper background checks. That 18-year-old went out in Texas, went out and got a gun and shot. If he'd had a few days to think about it, or somebody recognized that he was in mental distress, maybe he would have never done that. And I think that if we don't address it, not just as Republicans, at some point you got to say the pro-lifers are going to have to start pushing policy that saves lives, and everybody has a right to life, right, according to the Republicans, but their policies don't suggest that. So whenever you cut RX prescription drug programs for the elderly, that costs lives. When you kick 100,000 kids off of Medicaid, that doesn't save lives. Whenever you cut funding for our hospitals and Medicaid, and we lose our hospitals, that doesn't save lives. Our infant mortality rates in Missouri are third world level, and that's because we don't have access to healthcare, not just as women, but as human beings, especially when it comes to rural. They just have to travel too far to have a baby, and it's just not. I mean, we're a developed nation. We shouldn't be in this spot. Yes, go ahead.
just a quick thing.
Yeah.
I see that you have more signs out than your opponent.
Do you?
For a long time, I didn't see your opponent's signs. As I understand it, it's John Martin, but I have not seen that many. And
Yeah.
it took me a while to figure out that that's what he was running for.
So I don't know a lot about John, so I'll tell you what I do know. He owns Pro Pumping here in town, which is septic tanks, grease traps, and Pro Jetting, which is taking out material, loosening out material underground. He gave an interview with Como Buzz, and it's super. I haven't read it yet. I don't know that it's even come out yet. But from the reporter, Mr. Murphy has contacted me and wanted to know what my stance opposite of his was. And so he went pretty radical on his pro-life agenda. And I think you all might keep an eye on that, because as soon as that comes out, I need to read it. And then I'll have a response from Mr. Murphy. But yes, he's an extremist when it comes to pro-life policy and anti-LGBTQ. I knocked on a Republican door the other day, and he was all about not letting the gays be gays. So, and he said he'd already talked to John Martin, and they agreed. And I can tell you, there's one thing the Republicans do well, and that's attack people who have the least amount of voice. And so when you're talking about children, the elderly, LGBTQ, trans, these are the policies they push, because those people aren't able to fight back. And so you have to have people like me or Doug that are willing to stand up for people's rights. When it's women, trans, LGBTQ, they have the right to be who they are, and they don't have the right to tell them otherwise. Government shouldn't be criminalizing, or what's a good word for it? Just basically talking down or having the government suppress who they are. And so whenever they produce policies that does that, then you need to have a Democrat, in my opinion, that helps protect those. And so if they're going to produce policy to demonize them, then we need to fight back and say, hey, we got to have policy that protects them.
Okay, I see that David Robinson has a hand up, so maybe we can hear what he has to ask.
I really liked your last answer and bringing in Doug Mann, because I think he's a great spokesman for these issues that you just talked about as well. But I'll go back to public funding of political campaigns. Now, you call that a very unrealistic thing. It happens to be used in pretty much every democracy on earth. And it's one of those examples of how Americans think, well, we're different, we do things different. And sometimes the things we do different are not good things. And so that just brings me to my question. I've watched you campaign many times. You went through a primary that I call difficult. I don't know how it looked from your point of view, but I'm really impressed by the way your campaign came out victorious there. I like to think that, like Doug, in certain areas like you just talked about, on other big areas like public campaigns, things that we could do better if we just had good common sense. I like to think of you, Adrian, and matters of labor and working people. I like to think of you as one of our leaders to help the Democratic Party get away from the stigma that we have, that we're just pointy-headed intellectual professors like myself, who nobody would ever vote for because we're so liberal and unrealistic and all that. And I'm sitting here thinking, I need Adrian to tell these people that this is not unrealistic. It is not, how do we do that as Democrats better? I want to encourage you to lead on that.
So your question is, how can Democrats take these, how can we get more Democrats like yourself who from that group of people who speak to them, who get their votes? What can you do more? I know you've been doing it the whole time. That's what you do, but
Can you tell me what you're doing? I mean, it's something that has to be done, I think.
Well, if you're talking about just getting out the good word and proper direction, obviously that takes time, and right now it takes a lot of money. So, I was able to raise in our primary almost $40,000, which is unheard of, right? I also spent a lot of money. And that's primarily from labor and individual donations. So yes, we need to educate and push our message, and that's part, some of that, when you talk about Simpson Down campaigns and these dark money super PACs, it also makes it harder to get your message out. But when it's concentrated in the areas that you're supposed to be working in the 47th district, and those door knocks and talking to individuals, that's how you got to do it. And I've knocked almost 5,000 doors this election alone, personally. And they're usually short conversations because you have to be short conversations. I got a message, sorry. And so we as Democrats, you've seen Crystal Quaid running around the state of Missouri, even though she's running in her own district. She's doing that for women's rights. She's pushing those narratives, but she's working it all over the state. And that's part of getting that message out. Republicans push this tax cut issue because, they didn't realize that women wanted to keep their rights, so they divert. And so they grandstand the tax breaks in order to distract from the real message, and that's women's rights and LGBTQ rights and contraception and all the things that if they haven't gone after, they're gonna go after. Yeah, it's just about talking and talking and talking. I always said, when I was young, my dad always says, "Don't make me say it again." And then when I get older, I said, "Man, he can't be a politician if you can't say things more than once." But it's always about reiterating where you stand. And there's so many issues out there, and you really got to concentrate on what you feel is important, especially when it comes to who you're representing. And so you got to repeat yourself, and then you got to have other people speaking to what I've said or what they've learned about policy. And so everybody's got to be on that same page. I posted a picture of a friend of mine, on his Dodge truck the other day, and it went crazy after I posted. But he had several stickers on the back of his window of his truck. He had the Tea Party snake. He had blue line, some other, several others, and he had mine on his back window.
Yes, I saw that. So
it got posted in a couple groups, and a couple people, took it out of context. I posted to suggest that this guy, he knows me, he trusts me. We don't agree on policy, but because of who I am, and I was able to listen to him and stories that he put trust in me. And that's what I call progress. But there's some people that say, well, that's a Tea Party, they're racist. I get that. But progress is needed in order to change those narratives. He may be a Tea Party fool, but he's also a family man, got 2 kids. He went, he was a bull rider. He got into drugs real bad, went to prison, got out of prison, moved out of Texas, came to Missouri, changed his life, doesn't like government. Can't blame him. He went to jail, right? And so he's willing to support me because of who I am and what I represent, knowing that there's things that we agree on and we can push those things forward. And so whenever we talk about legislation, they're all things that we can agree on as Republicans and Democrats that we need to change. We should be able to say foreign interests shouldn't control our food industry in the state of Missouri or the United States. We should be able to agree on that. Now, the politicians may not, but the people have to stand and agree on that, and they do. I give a speech at Farm Bureau. I said, when do you all, as Republicans, start holding your Republican legislatures accountable for selling us out to foreign interests? You got to be willing to say that, knowing that it could be a bad deal for me. But I don't think it is, because that's part of that message. You got to be talking, you got to be saying the same things all the time. And they've got to understand that these policies they're pushing, they may be in litigation now, but that's because they pushed it to begin with, to sell our land to foreign interests. And so it's just a matter of repeating yourself and having you guys do it too.
Time for maybe one more question for him, if anybody has one. Oh, I see. All right, Steve, you have your hand up. Might as well hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. Adrian, this is really interesting. I'm one of the newest members here, and I'm one of the most remedial. I'm new to the state of Missouri. So this is an opportunity to learn about, and it's been a bit of culture shock, quite frankly.
Where you
So
from?
I'm at Chicago.
Okay, there you go.
So it's taken a little bit. So this is going to be more of a nuts and bolts question, because I've really appreciated your being with us and sharing with us your views on these different issues. And I find myself, tell me a little bit about your postcard campaign and how that works, because I understand that you are on the vanguard of that particular technique. And I'm just interested in, I'm interested in doing a few of them, but tell me what's involved.
Well, the postcards are, by the numbers, and there's been several statistics put out there that whenever somebody gets a postcard and has somebody took the time to write something out, that they have a tendency to read it and actually act on what you say. And so the process between postcards with a short message is part of getting out the vote. And so we send those to people like-minded in the district. And I've got 8,000 of them. I've probably got about 45 to 4,000 of them completed. And that's just to remind people, hey, make a plan to vote. We need you. We can't do it without you. If we want to change Missouri, we need you to vote. And so the basic message that I have people put on the postcard is make a plan to vote. You've got this much time. You can do 2 weeks absentee. There's no reason why you shouldn't vote. Get out there and vote. And so we need to vote. This is an off election compared to the presidential elections. And so turnout is usually lower. So you've got to counter that somehow to say, hey, it's important. And so this is where things like Roe Wade turns out the vote. Yeah. That means every Democrat needs to come out and vote. Every undecided who has now decided needs to come out and vote. I talk to people that don't vote. It doesn't matter to them. I talked to a guy the other day in Harrisburg. He was 83 years old and probably outworked me. Built his house, had horses, teams of horses, did plows. And he says, Adrian, I just don't have a reason to vote. I'm 83 years old. What am I going to change? I said, well, I'm here because I need your vote. And then we talk policy, and he's going to vote. So he needs to understand why, regardless of his age. I get it. I understand. You voted many years and nothing seems to change. But I'm here to represent the district, and we can win this. We can win this. The numbers say that we can win this. I need you to vote, and he'll vote.
That's perfect. That's perfect. Thank you. I'll go get me a few decks of those cards. You have sold me, and happy to contribute to the effort.
Well, I appreciate
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate newbies like Steve because it's useful to all of us to hear what you have to ask. Sometimes it's something I need to learn. And I would like to express that I've heard Adrian speak in the past and other campaigns. And Adrian, you've just improved your presentation so much.
I always worry about, am I going to do a better job than I did last time?
Yeah, well, from my point of view, yes, you have improved. I can't vote for you because you're not in my district, but good luck to you.
I appreciate it.
We have 5 minutes to go and one hand is up, and it's the Tillema family again.
You say we do have hands up?
Yeah. Oh, well, Dave Taylor, and there's a limit to how many hands I recognize. The Tillemas, ask it fast.
Do you want a chance to do a summative statement, Adrian? Because I would love to hear that too.
A summative statement? I'd like to say something else I want to work on. How about that?
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of elections ago, Governor Parsons came to the Carpenters Training Facility. And he's really trying to push trade schools because we don't have enough tradespeople, especially with the new infrastructure money coming in. Or the carpenters unions can't find enough help. But he walked through our training facility and talks about how he wants to expand trade schools. And I'm saying the answer is right in front of your face. We can work with the state as a union in the state to increase, because our training facilities doesn't cost the state anything, but we can work with the state to improve those facilities, make them bigger, send your high schoolers to those programs. We already sell high schools our training booklets at cost so that they have the material they need to teach people carpentry work if they want it. So I think if we're really concerned about cost, training, education, we should be working with the state and the unions, regardless if it's the UAW, the IBEW, whether it's electricians, pipe fitters, sprinkler fitters, road workers, that we can expand that with the state for virtually little cost. And if you're physically conservative, you should be all for that, regardless if you hate unions or not.
Okay, well, now it's about time to close up shop. I think, yeah. I do appreciate, Adrian, that you came to talk to us during this very busy time for you. And I applaud you and your efforts, and I wish you the best of luck. I hope that you win big time.
Me too.
So I applaud.
Here,
Let's see, Pam, is Pam here somewhere? Oh yeah, what's next week? You're muted.
Bethany Mann is next week. This is
Oh,
Kathy
okay.
Jensen.
Oh, all right. Well,
Can I just
then-
say one thing to Adrian
This week.
before we close?
Okay. Very good.
I really like that you're working on sustainable agriculture. And one ally, an important ally, is Dr. Michael Chippendale. He's emeritus professor from the University of Missouri, area of entomology and other agricultural fields. And he's doing a course at Osher on regenerative agriculture. And I've also heard him speak on sustainable agriculture. So for the future, he would be a good ally.
What's the first name?
Dr. Michael Chippendale. I met his wife, Annie Chippendale, writing postcards for you last week at the office.
Yeah, I'm gonna say he must be related to her, because I never, other than the Chippendale term, it struck me. So now, so her husband is all for sustainable farming and teaches classes with about it.
Yes,
And Osher is OSHER.
Yes.
that's correct.
Mhm.
And I
It's a